beer bread. Beer.
Howdy, welcome back to Cooking with Beast. I did get quite a few comments on people wanted me to do a video on doing bread. And like I said, bread's been done 100 different ways. So today we're going to do something that you don't really see every day. But I wanted to go over the basics of bread and take away any, myths about it being complicated, because it really isn't. Even if you don't have a bread machine, these little non-stick bread pans are a couple bucks. Most recipes, you probably wanted to get 2 of those, make 2 small loaves, just because the bread machines are a little bit bigger than these, or get a bigger bread loaf pan. This one works pretty good for me. But I did a video a while back about making bannock. Bannock is very simple. There's 100 different recipes on bannock, but the basics are it's a chemical leavener. It's flour with a little bit of baking soda or baking powder or something to make it light and fluffy. One of the things I like to bring with me is self-rising flour. Add a little bit of milk or powdered milk or water, and you can make a pretty quick biscuit very easily. Self-rising flour basically just has baking soda and some salt and stuff already in there. So for today's recipe, I'm not going to add any baking soda or salt or anything like that. I do have a 1/4 cup of sugar in here, and to that we're going to add 3 cups of self-rising flour. Again, if you have regular flour, and I'm not going to pack these down. These are going to be loose. It really should be sifted. If you pack this recipe down, you're going to end up with a pretty heavy, thick biscuit. And this is just going to be whatever I scoop out to be 3 cups. We're not going to be worried about it being too perfect, but roughly 3 cups. And it's going to get a little thick. I'm just going to kind of mix the sugars around there. The one thing I don't have in front of you is it's a 1/4 cup of melting butter, which I have on the stove melting. The lighting is just better in here, so we're going to do most of the video in here. The recipe I initially found had a 1/2 cup, which is a stick of butter. That just seemed ridiculous. I tried it with half, which was a 1/4 cup or half of a stick, and it's come out fine every time I've done it. So I don't see the need to use an entire stick of butter. Like I said, there is a little sugar in here. You could probably take the sugar down a little bit. And if you weren't using the self-rising flour, add maybe like 2 tablespoons of baking soda and a couple pinches of salt. But what I wanted to kind of tell you is the simplicity of making bread. Once you have the flour, usually be a little bit of salt for taste. If you're going to use a chemical leavener, then it's going to be baking soda or baking powder. With traditional breads, you're going to see a yeast. So you can either do like a powdered yeast. You can make your own yeast, which we may do down the road, is doing our own yeast. That'll be a different process. But that yeast is a natural lifter of the bread. It gives it a more chewy, consistency. You can add eggs. But to make bread, it's not hard. The traditional bread, you're going to have a little bit of water with a little bit of the yeast. The yeast needs sugars to eat. So to make that carbonation, to release the CO2 that lifts the bread. So usually what I do is I take a little bit of warm water, I add a little bit of yeast, and I add a pinch of sugar. It's usually the only sugar I put in my normal breads. It's just so the yeast has some food, so it starts bubbling and starts doing its thing right away. After that, put in your flour. Whatever your recipe is, it's going to be a certain ratio of flour to water. You don't even have to really measure it if you don't want to. You're going to know that you're going to need a little bit more flour, a little bit more flour, a little bit more water, depending on if your dough's too dry or too wet. It's really not too complicated. After that, really just some sort of fats. A lot of people use canola oil. You can use lard. You can use cream cheese. You can use butter. You can use Crisco. Any sort of fats really that mellows the bread out. Otherwise, the bread will be very dry and crumbly. You can mitigate that moisture level by using that fats increasing or decreasing. So play around with it. This stuff is cheap. If it doesn't work, that's fine. Find a recipe, try it, alter it, make it your own. If the recipe is too dark, it really, sky's the limit. So that was kind of the one reason. I just want to go over the basics of bread. It's not complicated. Find a recipe, Google it, you'll find a million of them, and just try it. You don't have to have a bread machine. You don't have to have anything fancy. If you don't want to wait for the yeast to rise, go with a self-rising recipe. The one we're doing today is going to have beer. Now the beer has a carbonation. Beer has already taken the yeast and the sugars and turned it into alcohol. And depending on what the beer was, the carbonation. But we're going to take 12 ounces of beer. And can you believe I had to go buy beer just for this recipe? With the P90X, I haven't really been keeping beer around the house. So, just get this mixed. You're going to kind of waste your time if you try and use a spatula, really just a sturdy spoon. At some point, you'll probably have to get your hands dirty in this, but it's a little bit different than your average bread recipe. And set that aside. And I'm not going to really need this. I just want to get all the dough and the flour incorporated. It's going to be super simple. We're going to take the dough, I'm going to elongate it a little bit so it fits in my bread pan. And I'm going to kind of push it out to the sides. And that's merely so that the butter will sit on top. And I will go grab the butter off the stove and be right back. Alright, we're back. Now, like I said, this is supposed to be an entire stick. I only use a quarter stick on here. I will kind of make sure that there's butter touching all the top of the bread. What this is going to do is we're going to set the oven at 375, and this is going to keep the top from burning, basically. We're only going to cook this loaf for 1 hour at 375, and let's go do that. Alright, so again, oven thermometer helps. We're at 375. I'm going to throw this guy in there. If you can kind of see where this is at now with the 3 cups in that smaller bread pan, shut the door here. We're going to turn on an hour timer. The only thing I would advise you to watch for is if you have a smaller bread pan than this one and it's already towards the top, this is going to rise significantly, and I don't want the butter to get pushed over the edge and onto your oven and maybe start smoking, catch fire. So just be aware that this is going to rise up quite a bit on you. So we'll come back in an hour. Alright, we're back after an hour. Now I have done this recipe before, and I pulled it out about 35 minutes because I was worried about the top getting too dark. And 35 minutes and then about 15 minutes sitting on the counter, letting the heat that it already had sort of finish cooking it. That worked out pretty good. The butter that we pour on top is basically to keep that from burning. So this one got a touch bit dark here on the edge. Maybe if I used an entire stick of butter, it would mitigate that. But you can see it pulls out nicely. We'll cut a nice piece off here so you can kind of get a look at the inside. The first time I made this for the family, they were blown away. They were not figuring on the flavor, really. It doesn't have a strong beer flavor. I wouldn't hesitate to serve this to kids or anything like that. It's got just that nice malty, yeasty flavor, and we even used a wheat beer. So, enjoy.